This film, I sat down and watched it, and it is absolutely amazing. So, congratulations.
Oh man, thank you so much. Appreciate it, dude. I appreciate you checking it out.
So, tell us a little bit about where the idea for this film first started for you, because it is such a fantastic idea for a film.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'd been wanting to tell kind of an exorcism story for a little while from a different point of view. And I kind of, for this, went back to sort of my own roots. I was born in Puerto Rico. My mother had told me some really fascinating stories about brujas and cure, people who cure people on the island, spiritualists, things like that. And it kind of had dug in deep. And as I started approaching the story, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be really cool to tell a story like this, but from a completely different cultural point of view, and rely on not, the Bible and a priest that comes in with a special order from the Vatican and all those things, and to tell this type of story in a way that was just fresh and a whole different way in. And that made every decision much more exciting and thrilling and different.
What was that like, going back and revisiting those stories that your mother told? Because I'm in a similar boat to you. I grew up with a grandmother who came from a gypsy background. So in our family, she talked about vampires being real and things like that. What was that like for you, going back and revisiting your mother's stories? Because I find I do that with my grandmother's stories when I write as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was really fascinating for me to use that as the starting off point. And then, in our story is about a woman named Christina, that she has lost touch with her ancestral roots and her cultural roots. She returns back to Veracruz, Mexico, chasing a story on witchcraft and these sorts of things, and, discovers a whole lot during her journey there. So Christina's journey was a lot like my own, and probably yours at different points in your life. Like, you start getting fascinated about where you came from, start getting fascinated about your family history. So it had me start to research just some of these different practices and beliefs that are held not only, for my own, homeland of Puerto Rico, but also throughout Latin America, throughout Mexico. We settled in this brilliant region for the story called Veracruz, or named Veracruz, Mexico, where kind of the influences of the Aztec and the Mayans are there. The Caribbean influences are there throughout. So it was a really cool place to find a really rich history and rich culture to draw from. And yeah, I mean, the film certainly takes some of the things I'd heard or things that I'd watched on YouTube and other things and heightens them to a whole new level. But all of it was just really fascinating to revisit. And then for our cast and for different members of our crew who would come in who are Latino or from different areas in Mexico, and everyone had kind of a story and a connection about, like, oh, well, my aunt, my tia was like this kind of spiritualist, or, this is a story of, our Julia Vera, who plays Luz, our Bruja in the movie, she actually had visited Bruja as a child, and she drew a lot of those experiences into it as well. So it was really just fascinating for all of us to kind of reach back into an older time and an older place and find inspiration.
And did you travel there yourself to do some of the research, or were you able to do most of the research from home now?
Yeah, we relied on a lot of home for the research. I relied on some really great documentaries. Vice did some incredible documentaries in the area. I relied on just speaking to other people who had, some of my Mexican friends and friends that had different experiences. One of our producers is from Guatemala. She lent a lot of knowledge to certain regions and certain things that we could rely on. But yeah, we did most of our research virtually that went into the script, certainly.
So what was the most interesting things that you discovered? I always love that process of researching for a screenplay, and you end up finding stuff that you never thought that you would find in that research. What was the most interesting things that you found, and were you able to use any of those things in your actual script?
So many things, so many things. I like to say that the script was really a living document in a lot of ways. Like, I wrote the first draft of it, and I shared it with the director, who's a great friend of mine, Christopher Allender. We've been friends since we were, I don't know, we've been friends for 20 something years now. We went to college together. And he, you know, as the script started taking form, he would start doing some research and then hit me up and say, like, this thing's pretty awesome. Let's see if we can figure out how to work this into the movie. So one of those things was there's a death whistle in the movie, or in Noir, I believe it's called a hiccup. And it's this, like, you know, kind of skull-faced whistle thing that when it was first found, when archaeologists first found it, they didn't know exactly what these were used for until somebody actually blew into it. And when you blow through this thing, it creates a shrieking, horrifying scream sound. And so the moment we saw that, you know, in our research and just found that online, that became something we immediately knew had to go into the movie, and, you know, wrote it into the movie in different ways. Like, our demon eventually sounds that way. Our characters blow that instrument. And we contacted our composer, Ben Lovett, while it was still in script form, because Ben's a friend and Ben's an incredible composer. He composed The Night House and The Ritual and all these great movies. And he's a friend of ours that we knew was going to work on the movie. So we were like, all right, buddy, listen, I just wrote this in. Get ready. It's going to be a thing you're going to have to figure out how to work into the score. And he did. And we ended up finding, like, a gentleman by the name of Martin, who is a specialist in sort of pre-Columbian music and all these ancient instruments that you can play. He's probably one of the few people in the world who can blow a death whistle and have it sound the way it probably should accurately sound. So that was a piece of research that I went into it. We found some incredible things that lent knowledge to the design of the demon itself. You know, found places, photographs where kind of in ancient traditions they would drill jewels in the teeth of people. So we said, okay, that's got to be a part of our design. And kind of the elongated skull that our demon has as well. Spoiler, there's a demon in this movie. That was also brought in by a lot of research. So certainly every time we would find something really fascinating and interesting, we would save the video and show our actors and be like, all right, this is how you spit the holy water into the air. This is how we want you to try to do it. Or the herbs coming in, and things like that. So, you know, there was always really cool stuff that we were finding, and then just trying to always, you know, reflect on those things and then just try to heighten them as much as possible.
The other key element of this film too is the story of Christina and the fact that she's lost that connection to her ancestors. Is that something that you really wanted to tell the story of in this film as well? Because you see that right around the world these days, where you sit down and talk to people and you find out they know nothing about their ancestors at all.
Yeah, no, that was a really important story for me. I mean, I was born in Puerto Rico, like I said, but I grew up in the States. And, you know, in my household growing up, a lot of my family was all more practicing English. So I do have audio cassettes of me talking as a kid in Spanish, but over time, I kind of lost that ability to speak Spanish. So I can understand it okay, and I can struggle through it when I need to, but really being fluent in it is something I don't have anymore. And for a lot of my life, I thought that, that was unique to me, right?
Yeah.
And then as you get older and you meet others, you discover people from all sorts of, you know, not just Spanish cultures, but all sorts of cultures, like you said, that have kind of lost, you know, one generation back, and they've lost a lot of those things that their previous generation knew or taught or spoke and all those things. So as I, you know, have grown older just as a person, I've become much more interested and fascinated in returning back to Puerto Rico, to eating to eating the foods and learning how to make them, and then also, you know, trying to relearn the language and speak it. Super important for me, just on a personal level. And then as this movie, as we started to share this movie with others, it's been really thrilling to hear other people's points of view, to say, like, yeah, that's my story too. That's exactly the same. For me, I can relate to that because, like, you know, for much of my growing up, I was like, man, everyone else in my family speaks Spanish. I don't. My friends in high school that could speak Spanish really well. I'd be like, man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, you said you wanted to make an exorcism movie, and one critic has described this movie as the best exorcism movie since The Exorcist. How did that sit with you? That must have felt great when you heard that.
That was amazing. I mean, that was amazing to have a review like that. I mean, we were just trying to make the best version of this movie we could possibly do. So our guiding light was, like I said, it was approaching it from a different cultural point of view. And then any opportunity we had to do something different, we would try to take that path. So if it felt like it was something we'd seen a bunch of times or something where we knew where the story was going, we would stop and reflect and be like, okay, is there a chance to change things around at the midpoint and do things a little bit differently? And we were thrilled. I mean, it all started with just a story that we cared about, regardless of the scary bits. So for our actors, they really viewed this movie more as a drama, to be honest with you. I was like, did you skip all the other body horror stuff in here? But yeah, they kind of saw this movie first and foremost as a dramatic movie, and I think that's why it works for many people, is because yes, we deliver on the scary stuff, but you can remove all of that and there's still a journey to be had. And for movies, we're living in a really cool time for horror movies. I mean, horror movies go through different stages, right? So sometimes it's meant to expose the evils of society or the depths of the human condition, or it's meant to just scare you or take you on a ride or be a slasher movie, whatever. We're growing up in this, or not growing up, we're living in this really, really dope stage of horror with A24 and others that are just making movies that really, George Peele, obviously, movies that really mean something beyond what the facade is. So we knew if we could make a movie where if the facade was scary, that would be great. And then if there was something underneath it that people could talk about or discuss or take a lesson from, or, apply it to their lives, we knew that would be the way to go too.
Do you think that's something I've loved as a horror fan over the past few years, and I think your film really does show it as well, that a lot of horror screenwriters and a lot of horror directors are focusing more on characterization and things like that and these days, and that actually ends up making the film even more scary because they're characters that you can relate to. You can put yourself in that position of what the character's going through. Was that something that you were aware of when you worked on this screenplay, that characterization had become such a massive part of this film?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, regardless, we would have probably tried to deliver a movie where we put our characters first and we put our story first. But, like once you've seen a movie like Hereditary and you see Toni Collette's performance in that, that movie would have completely been a different movie if she wasn't firing off on all cylinders in every single scene.
Yeah.
And so that, once movies like that come around, it's hard to go back to the old ways. Pardon the pun, but hard to go back to just like, hey, let's just do like a funhouse kind of scary movie. Like once you've seen what people can do with the form, you really, it does influence you a bit. And for our movie, it was really tough to find our lead actress, Bridget Cali-Canellis, because we needed someone who could be vulnerable and tough and be, have a lot of dark issues and also just like get through a lot of physically enduring challenges throughout this movie.
Yep.
But we knew if we could find somebody who could do all of those things, it would really ground the movie, and then you'd have, a place to grow from. But if we didn't have that grounded, if we didn't have that character at the center of it doing all the work that Bridget does, it'd be a totally different movie.
Definitely. And have you found it weird with the film coming out in the middle of a pandemic? Like, we're still in lockdown here in Australia at the moment, and so all of our films that have come out pretty much over the last 18 months have either been streaming or drive-in theaters when we've had that kind of
Right.
moment when the lockdowns have kind of ended, but the only things open are the drive-ins. Is it weird bringing a film out at the moment?
It certainly is. I mean, I think after now we're so long into this, we're kind of used to it now, right? So now a movie debuting on a streaming platform is like, oh my God, it's like a movie's coming out. Hopefully we'll be back in theaters for real soon. But yeah, this movie wrapped production 2 days before we were put into lockdown originally. So it was 2 days before, things got really serious in Los Angeles. So luckily we had the movie in the can, but all the post-production was done just, remotely, the director and I on Zoom with the editor, working our way through it. And one of the things we love to do in making a movie is like, hey, let's do some test screenings. Let's get a couple of people in the room and see what their reaction to, which we couldn't do at all. So that was the most challenging part, was continuing to just work on this movie in a void and really keep pushing yourself to like rewatch it with fresh eyes to go, okay, Is this scene working? Is this too slow? Because when you see a movie with an audience, everything is apparent. The moment you watch it with them, you're like, oh, this part drags. This part, this isn't working. This needs to switch. So that was certainly challenging, but we kept going back to it and figuring out how to do it. And then, now it's released and it's out there, and it's different than a theatrical experience or whatever, but it's also super exciting that the movie can release and be in like 250 territories immediately.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's awesome. Like there are people in Mexico and in Hong Kong and in, Brazil, whatever, watching this movie all at the same time. That's pretty thrilling.
I think the pandemic's actually changed a lot of things like that, and some of the things have been actually positive. Like, I saw the latest Conjuring film in a drive-in, and I think that was such an amazing experience. But not only that, because drive-ins here always do a double feature, there was no other horror movie out at that time, so they put The Lost Boys on before it.
Oh, wow.
So a whole generation of new generation of horror film fans discovered The Lost Boys for the first time as well. So it's had this great effect, and streaming platforms like Shudder have taken off here in Australia since the lockdown started. So I think it's actually been pretty positive for film lovers, despite everything that's been going on.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And I think that, we've consumed so much media throughout the pandemic that, I think a little while ago, I mean, things still get lost in the shuffle, obviously, but there is an excitement to like a new release that you see coming to a streaming platform more than you would have maybe paid attention a few years ago. You'd be like, okay, I'll get around to it. But it's like, oh yeah, same. I mean, I didn't end up seeing Conjuring in a drive-in, but I certainly watched it release night.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my God, it's a movie night. It's the new Conjuring. Let's watch it. So I think it's different. It's thrilling. I still think for one day when we can all get back in theaters, I mean,
Definitely.
A movie theater with, especially to see a horror movie or a comedy or whatever, like there's something about that communal movie experience that's so wonderful and one of a kind, and I love it. But until we get there again, it's for fans, for people who love these things, like, all these movies coming out in such an accessible way has been really great.
I think cinemas are going to have a huge boost here as well when everything reopens, because one of the things we've discovered is that Australians have become tired of watching the news. People are turning off news services at an alarming rate. In fact, a lot of people that I've spoken to have said they've got streaming platforms on their TV and they have not watched free-to-air television for the last 6 months. They've just focused on streaming, but everybody wants to get out of the house. So I think when cinemas reopen, we are going to see so many people flock to the cinemas.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, mate, I want to wrap it up, but I want to say thank you so much for chatting to us today. And is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners out there before they go and check out The Old Ways?
No, go check it out. I mean, it's coming out, or it's out now, I believe, on Blu-ray and DVD, and the Blu-ray's got just an extraordinary amount of cool stuff on it. We did over 2 hours of content. There's, of course, the commentaries that you would expect. There's also storyboards to screen comparisons. There's alternate endings that are in storyboard form, but all sound designed and everything. And then there's I think there's might be 80 or 90 minutes. It's a really long feature length documentary. So if you care about how movies are made, and if you've listened to the last 20 minutes and been entertained, there's much more of it on the disc. So I think you'll dig it and check it out.
Definitely. Well, mate, again, thank you so much for taking the time